Have you ever wondered if the spirits of the past still linger in the places we left behind? Bodie, California, isn't just an old mining town. It's a time capsule, frozen in dust and silence, a ghost town in every sense of the word. But what if that silence isn't empty? What if beneath the creaking wood and wind-blown echoes, something else is whispering? Nestled high in the Sierra Nevada mountains, Bodie was once a bustling gold rush town in the late 1800s. At its peak, nearly 10,000 people called this place home. But gold is a fickle promise, and greed has a price. Fires, disease, brutal winters, and a relentless wave of violence tore through Bodie like a curse. Murders happened in broad daylight. Children were buried before their first birthday. And when the gold dried up, so did the town, so lad, least the one we can see. Today, Bodie is preserved as a state historic park, but what's been left behind is more than just abandoned homes and rusty machinery. It's said that Bodie is haunted, not metaphorically, but tangibly. Viscerally haunted in a way that makes your skin tighten when you walk through its empty streets. The park rangers won't talk about it openly, but if you spend enough time here, you'll hear the stories. A rocking chair that moves on its own, footsteps in locked buildings, a child's laughter where there are no children. And then there's the Bodie curse, a legend that says anyone who takes even a pebble from the site will be plagued by misfortune until they return it. But we're not here for pebbles. We came for voices. As twilight fell over the town, our team stepped into the cold shadow of what Bodie used to be. Not tourists, not thrill seekers, investigators with microphones, EMF detectors, full spectrum cameras, and one tool we believe may bridge the living and the dead: the EVP recorder, electronic voice phenomena. It sounds clinical, maybe even technical, but at its core, it's one of the simplest, most unnerving tools in paranormal research. Ask a question aloud, wait, and play it back. Sometimes, in the white noise between silence, you hear something you never said, something or someone answering. It's not a guarantee. Spirits aren't vending machines, but in places like Bodie, where grief and violence steeped the earth, the walls might remember, and sometimes they speak back. We began in the heart of town, near the old Standard Mill, where countless workers once toiled in. Some died. The buildings around us leaned like weary old men, and the wind was sharp, almost slicing. Everything felt still, too still. I looked up at the saloon where a man was stabbed to death during a poker game in 1879. A shiver slid down my spine, not from the cold, but from the sensation that someone was watching us through the cracked window above. No movement, no sound, Yet unmistakably, undeniably, that feeling of not being alone. We spoke softly, respectfully. Is anyone here with us? A pause. Can you tell us your name? Another pause. Nothing but static. But this was only the beginning. What drives someone to haunt a place long after their body has decayed to dust? What unfinished story keeps them tethered? That's what we hoped to find out. Because the deeper you go into Bodie, the more it feels like the town itself is listening. And perhaps, just perhaps, waiting to speak, if you listen carefully. Sometimes the silence isn't silence at all. The wind in Bodie doesn't whistle, whispers. And on that night, it felt like every gust carried a message too faint for the ear, but maybe not for the mic. Before we stepped deeper into Bodie's decaying heart, we paused to prepare. Not just mentally, but technically. EVE sessions are not something you rush into. The goal isn't just to hear ghosts, it's to make contact respectfully and methodically. To open a doorway, not tear one down. Our lead investigator, Sarah, held up the EVP recorder, black, unassuming device, no larger than a cell phone, but far more sensitive. It records at a frequency range that often picks up ambient sounds the human ear simply cannot detect. Some say spirits manipulate the surrounding energy to form words. Others believe it's residual, a kind of emotional echo imprinted onto the environment. Either way, if something speaks, this device will hear it. We paired it with a parabolic microphone, which can isolate sounds from specific directions, and a spirit box, an unsettling tool that rapidly scans radio frequencies, creating a static-laden noise floor from which words sometimes emerge. Not random radio chatter, but intelligent responses. Names, numbers, full sentences at times. Sarah had done this before more times than she could count in. She knew the rules. Never provoke, never assume, always document. Our tech specialist, Marcus, carried the infrared camera rig, the lenses gleaming like glass eyes in the dark. It sees in spectrums we can't. Alongside him was Leo, a skeptic turned believer after one too many nights in too many haunted places. He was the one who reviewed every recording with forensic precision, hunting for anomalies most would dismiss. And then there was me, the storyteller, the one trying to listen not just to the sounds, but the silence between them. We agreed to split into two small teams and cover key areas before regrouping. Leo and Sarah would take the old schoolhouse rumored to echo with the faint scratching of chalk on the blackboard long after sunset. Marcus and I headed toward the Deschambault Hotel, one of the last standing remnants of Bodie's former elegance, and a place known for cold spots and the sound of shuffling feet when no one is present. I tucked the EVP recorder into my coat pocket and clipped a lav mic to my collar. Ready? As asked. As I'll ever be, I replied. We weren't just walking into abandoned buildings. We were stepping into history's scar tissue, into places where sorrow had steeped into the very walls. And the town, in its strange quiet way, welcomed us. Or warned us. I'm still not sure which. Inside the hotel, the darkness was total. No power, no safety lights. Just our LED rigs, casting long shadows across peeling wallpaper and collapsed furniture. I held out the recorder and pressed the button. Is there someone here who remembers this place? I asked, gently. A pause. We stood still, barely breathing. Do you miss the sound of voices, of music, of life? Another silence, longer this time. The kind that presses on your chest. Marcus looked at me. You hear that? I strained my ears. At first, nothing. Then, a soft creak. Not unusual in an old building. But it came again 3 rhythmic steps across the floorboards, upstairs. We knew no one else was in the building. I glanced at the recorder, the red light blinking steadily. Sometimes, it's not about what you hear in the moment, it's what you discover later, alone in the dark, with headphones on. Back outside, Sarah and Leo emerged from the schoolhouse, pale-faced and tight-lipped. You're gonna want to hear what we got, Sarah said, holding up her recorder like an offering. We asked if the children were still learning, and something answered. We all stood there for a moment, under the stars, surrounded by the hollow bones of a dead town, listening to the wind. It was only the beginning. Because the real mystery doesn't lie in the asking, it lies in what answers. And tonight, Bodie was speaking. There's a moment in every investigation where the line between imagination and reality blurs, when the things you brushed off as creaks or drafts begin to form patterns, intent. And in Bodie, that moment came quickly. After regrouping, we decided to move toward the old general store. It still stood, barely, its windows cracked. The sign faded into ghostly lettering. Time had curled everything inside. Papers, labels, even the wooden floor. But the strangest thing was how intact it all felt. As if someone had locked the door and left only yesterday. Except no one ever came back. We pushed the door open with a deep groan of rusted hinges, careful not to disturb the dust. The air inside was cold, colder than outside. Too cold for the hour, for the season. I hit record. Can you tell us your name? Sarah's voice was steady but respectful, like she was speaking to someone who once stood right here, behind this same counter. Silence. Then, something odd. A soft click, like a glass jar being set down. We all heard it. No one moved. Did you used to work here? She continued. Did you serve the townspeople? Marcus's EMF reader flickered yellow. A low signal, but steady. No cell towers. No power lines. Nothing that should have triggered it. We held our breath as we waited. Then Leo asked, "Why are you still here?" It came out in a whisper, almost too quiet, to catch, but it hung in the air like fog. The silence that followed felt ... different, not empty, charged, heavy, as if someone had walked into the room and was standing just behind us. "I feel watched," I murmured. It wasn't paranoia. It was primal. A cold spot moved from one side of the room to the other, brushing past Marcus, who shivered involuntarily. We followed it with our recorders, like chasing a shadow without a light. Next, we moved toward Bodie's old schoolhouse. The windows, though shattered, still framed the building like haunted eyes. The bell tower above us was silent, but the inside ... It had echo. Chalkboards still bore the faint outline of lessons. Desks sat in uneven rows, some with names carved into the wood, childish, shaky. Leo paused at one and traced his fingers along the name, Clara. "She died here," he whispered. "Pneumonia. 8 years old." "Clara," Sarah called softly. "Do you remember your teacher? Do you miss your friends?" We played back the recording right there. At first, only the sound of our voices. Then, under Sarah's last question, a second voice, high pitch, fragile, just one word. Yes, we froze. It hadn't been audible in real time, but there it was, faint but unmistakable. The syllable clipped like breath against a mirror. Sarah's hands were trembling slightly as she pressed pause. "Play it again," I said. We listened 5 times. Each time, the voice was there. Each time, it chilled deeper than the last. From there, we made our way to the edge of town, to a place we had agreed to visit last, the Bodie Cemetery. It's small, uneven, and terrifying in its stillness. Graves sink into the hills, names long faded. Some plots are marked with only wooden crosses or stones. Children, gunmen, women who died in childbirth, men lost to mine, collapses, whole families. We walked quietly, our boots crunching softly over gravel and weeds. "This is where the town sleeps," Marcus said. "Or wakes," Sarah added. The EV session here was solemn. We weren't investigators, now we were guests among the dead. "Do you remember your name?" I asked softly. "Is there anything you want to say?" Static? Then a sharp pop in the recorder. A second of garbled noise. And then 3 words. "Don't forget us." The voice was male, low, weighted, and then nothing. We stood in silence, no one speaking. There was nothing to say. Some answers don't need explanation. they just need to be heard. Because in that moment, Bodie wasn't just a ghost town. It was a memory, alive and grieving, refusing to be erased. The thing about EVP recordings is that the real fear doesn't come during the investigation. It comes afterward. When you're alone, playing the audio back through headphones in a dark room, listening for a voice that shouldn't be there. We left Bodie before midnight. It wasn't fear that drove us out. It was respect. The town had spoken. Whatever it was we'd heard, whatever had chosen to answer, deserved to be handled with care. And that meant returning to the studio, isolating each recording, and peeling back the layers of silence to find what might be hiding beneath. Sarah and Leo took the lead on analysis. They scrubbed the files through sound filters, noise reduction, and frequency isolators. Methods used in both paranormal research and forensic audio work. Not everything we caught was clear, and not everything was paranormal. A breeze, a piece of gravel shifting underfoot, the static crackle of radio interference of it had to be ruled out. But there were pieces we couldn't explain, like the general store response. We pulled up the clip where Sarah had asked, "Did you used to work here?" After 5 seconds of ambient hiss, a faint but clear voice answered, "Stalking." A single word. Not a radio signal, not a trick of wind, just that stalking. As if someone was still restocking shelves that hadn't held goods in over a century. Then came the classroom clip, Clara's voice. This was harder to ignore. Children's voices are rare in EVP, and this one had no background distortion, no sign of blending from any environmental sound. It simply existed, high and soft. Yes, as if answering not just Sarah's question, but a longing of her own. A kind of emotional residue, fragile and chilling. We tried running the voice through a pitch analyzer. No match with any of our team. No known interference. Just ... her. And then the graveyard. This one unsettled all of us. When we isolated the clip with the phrase, "Don't forget us," it sent a silence across the room. None of us wanted to break. The voice had depth, a kind of ancient sorrow in it, measured, deliberate. And there was something about the plural, us. Leo ran it back through a waveform comparison, looking at how the sound behaved. It didn't match human speech patterns from the environment. No one near the mic. No overlapping frequency spikes from our gear. It came from nowhere. And yet, it was there. We cross-checked these findings with Bodie's historical records. The man's voice from the cemetery. Could it have been one of the many miners buried there after the 1872 collapse? Could Clara be linked to the 8-year-old who died of pneumonia as listed in the town death register? These weren't fantasies. These were names, dates, buried facts, resurrected in whispers. And here's the thing. None of us expected perfect clarity. This isn't Hollywood. Real EVP is grainy, fragmented, cryptic. But that's what makes it more haunting. Because when you hear a voice that shouldn't be there, it forces you to ask not just who said it, but why. Some researchers dismiss EVP as pareidolia, our brain trying to find patterns in random noise. That's a fair critique. But when you're in a place like Bodie, and the voice says something relevant, something aware, pareidolia starts to feel like a thin excuse. At the end of our analysis, we stitched together the strongest clips into a timeline. We invited a small group of listeners, people not involved in the investigation, unaware of the context, to hear them. Not one person left without chills. Most of them said the same thing. It feels like they're still there. Maybe that's what EVP really is. Not evidence, not proof, but presence. A reminder that memory doesn't die with the body, that places remember, and Bodie remembers everything. We came to Bodie looking for whispers, and what we found was something far more powerful. Voices reaching across the silence of time, asking not to be forgotten. As we sat around reviewing the final clips, not haunted, not haunted, not haunted, not heavy, but aware. As if Bodie had followed us home. As if those brief connections we made, those flickers in the static weren't just artifacts of sound, but actual exchanges. Moments where the veil lifted, even just a little. The evidence we gathered wasn't flashy. No full-bodied apparitions, no slamming doors, no dramatic outbursts. But that's not what we came for. What we captured: simple words, faint phrases, a name, a response meant more. They hinted at a consciousness that still lingered in Bodie, a town not entirely empty. The voice that said stalking didn't just speak, it responded, as if someone still clocked into work behind that dusty counter. Clara's soft yes wasn't an echo. It was a reply. And Dante, forget us. Those 3 words felt less like a warning and more like a plea. A reminder that the stories buried beneath this forgotten town still matter. Of course, EVP is a deeply subjective field. For every believer, there's a skeptic. And that's exactly how it should be. We're not here to convince. We're here to listen. Whether you interpret these voices as spirits, energy imprints, psychological phenomena, or emotional projections, one thing remains undeniable. Something answered. Does forces you to reconsider what silence really means. And maybe that's the true value of these investigations. Not to prove the paranormal, but to recognize the human desire to reach back, to understand, to remember. If you've ever walked into an old house and felt a chill you couldn't explain, if you've ever stood alone in a quiet room and felt like someone else was watching, then maybe, just maybe, you've already heard those whispers. Bodie is still out. They're dusty, wind-blown, crumbling. But it's not dead. Not really. Because, as long as someone is still listening, still asking questions, still remembering, it's alive in the only way that matters. And now, we ask you, did you hear what we heard? Go back. Replay the clips. Not just with your ears, but with your curiosity. Maybe you'll hear something new. Maybe you'll feel that same chill we felt when Clara answered. Maybe you'll understand why someone whispered, "Don't forget us." And if you've ever had an experience of your own, an unexplained sound, a moment of connection you can't quite shake, tell us in the comments below. Because, in the end, we're all just stories waiting to be heard. And some of them never stop telling themselves.